cabinet controversy. Attorney General Jeff Sessions urged to step aside. We have team coverage from the White House and Capitol Hill. Protecting minors. A victim of clerical abuse steps down from a Vatican panel. We report from Rome. My one-on-one with Sean Spicer.
I think you have to wake up every day and follow in the teachings of God.
The White House press secretary tells me how his Catholic faith guides his life in the spotlight and an unconventional path.
People don't say, I need a new president for my conservative think tank. Get me a French horn player.
My conversation with Catholic conservative Arthur Brooks on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, March 2nd, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Attorney General Jeff Sessions recuses himself from the investigation into Russian meddling in the U.S. presidential election, following Democratic claims he lied under oath about contacting a top Russian diplomat during a press conference this afternoon. Sessions says he did not lie, and he's following the recommendations of his staff.
I have studied the rules and considered their comments and evaluation. I believe those recommendations are right and just. Therefore, I have recused myself in the matters that deal with the Trump campaign.
We have team coverage, including correspondent Jason Calvi on Capitol Hill and Wyatt Goolsbee, who joins us from the White House. Wyatt.
Lauren, President Trump says he has total confidence in Jeff Sessions. The White House is dismissing accusations against the Attorney General. They say the meetings with the Russian ambassador were not out of the ordinary since they happened while Sessions was on the Senate Armed Services Committee.
I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I not have communications with the Russians.
Jeff Sessions told Congress under oath in January that he did not talk to the Russians. He now says he did, but makes one important distinction. Responding to a tweet, Sessions wrote, "The question was if the meeting was about the 2016 elections. It was not, just as other meetings with ambassadors were not." Senator Al Franken says Sessions' remarks in January weren't clear enough.
At the very least, this was extremely misleading. I just asked a question, and he was the one who offered this.
The Justice Department, now led by Sessions, is investigating Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. election. A spokeswoman for Sessions confirms that he met twice last year with Ambassador Sergei Kiselak, considered by the wider U.S. intelligence community to be one of Russia's top spies in D.C. Foreign policy expert James Kirchick says all of the political infighting on Capitol Hill is playing into Russia's hands.
Maybe Vladimir Putin isn't so bad a guy. That is the message that the Russians are trying to sow across the world, and in particular in Europe.
Speaking with CNN, Russia is making an effort to shift the blame back to the media.
Are you concerned that the investigations into Russia are going to turn up more secret meetings?
Please stop this spreading lie and false news.
Many in Russia are dismissing the accusations. The uproar is widely seen in Moscow as efforts by Trump's political opponents to block any attempts at mending relations between the two countries. Lauren?
Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the White House. Thank you, Wyatt. Correspondent Jason Calvi continues our team coverage from Capitol Hill. Jason, what are you hearing from lawmakers?
Yeah, that was the big question here at the Capitol all day. Should Sessions recuse himself of any cases involving Russian meddling of the U.S. election? Earlier in the day, I spoke with Florida Senator Marco Rubio, who said he wanted to speak with Sessions before answering that question. House Speaker Paul Ryan saying that Sessions should take that step if he himself was the subject of the probe. But tonight, lawmakers are still sparring.
Jeff Sessions needs to resign.
A demand repeated today by the top Democrat in the Senate and in the House. But Republicans accuse Democrats of playing politics.
I think Democrats are letting their hair on fire to get you to cover this story, to try and keep repeating the same story. I think they're trying to get this coverage going. There's nothing new that we have seen here.
Speaker Ryan says Congress's intelligence committees are investigating, but those probes aren't enough for Democrats.
The Republicans should finally come to an understanding that we need an independent commission to investigate all of the Russian matters.
In less than 2 months of the Trump administration, 2 high-ranking officials lie about their contacts with the Russians. And to me, where there's smoke, there's fire. This smoke now is so thick, we need to have a special prosecutor investigate.
As a senior member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Sessions spoke with 25 ambassadors last year. A Russian foreign ministry spokeswoman says meeting American politicians is everyday business. But Senator Marco Rubio says not with him.
I meet with ambassadors all the time, not from every country. Obviously, I don't get any. I've never met with a Russian ambassador that I recall, but that doesn't mean anything wrong per se with it. In this particular case, it happened to happen during the middle of the campaign, where we know Russians were trying to interfere with our election. So that's why it's concerning.
Senator Schumer says the Attorney General should have been ready for the question about Russia during the confirmation hearing because the link between President Trump and Russia was already an issue then. Lauren?
What has the House Congressional Intelligence Committee found so far?
The committee chairman, Representative Devin Nunes, says he still doesn't have any evidence that people linked with the Trump campaign had improper contact with Russia. He spoke today after meeting with the FBI director, James Comey.
Thank you, Jason Calvi, reporting from Capitol Hill. Joining us now is Hans von Spakovsky of the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Laura.
What was the meeting like at the Heritage Foundation?
Calling it a meeting is quite an exaggeration. Jeff Sessions was the keynote speaker in a room with 100 ambassadors and their staff, co-sponsored with the U.S. State Department and a number of other organizations. The only thing that happened was the Russian ambassador and a number of other ambassadors came up to Sessions as he was leaving the stage to thank him for his remarks. And that's the supposed meeting at which some, I guess, deep conspiracy was supposedly hatched. I mean, it's a ridiculous claim.
Is this a witch hunt?
I think it is a political witch hunt.
Why?
Well, because look, what Sessions was asked at his confirmation hearing was, did you, as a surrogate for the Trump campaign, have discussions with the Russian government about the election? He said, no, I didn't. And obviously, he didn't have that at the meeting I just discussed, and the only other meeting he had was as a senator and a member of the Armed Services Committee. He had a meeting with the Russian ambassador to discuss the relations with Russia. That has nothing to do with the election, and the Russian ambassador was one of only about 24 ambassadors that he met with last year.
Do you believe that he should have recused himself from any probe related to the 2016 presidential campaign?
Well, he did that today, as you know, in a press conference. I actually don't think he had any need to do it yet. I think it was premature. Why? Because there's nothing for him to recuse himself from at the moment. The FBI is looking at this file. They have not yet sent the file to the Attorney General to review.
Do you believe that here in Washington that just conversations like that should be something that the Washington Post or others in the mainstream media should be focusing on without all of the facts? That was a leading question, I must admit.
Yeah, no, but that's actually a very good point. Something that's getting lost in all of this is that there is not one iota of any evidence that a criminal violation of the law occurred. Having a discussion with the Russian ambassador does not violate federal law. And so far, we don't know of any kind of actual interference in the election, as people claim, other than somebody hacked the DNC computer system. And what did they do? Well, they simply revealed the false narrative that the DNC was putting out that they were supposedly staying neutral in the primary election when, in fact, they weren't.
Hans von Spakovsky of the Heritage Foundation, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
The president meets with sailors and shipbuilders on a new aircraft carrier in Virginia, days after saying he's adding $54 billion to the Pentagon's projected budget to keep America safe.
We will give our military the tools you need to prevent war and, if required, to fight war and only do one thing. You know what that is? Win. Win.
The president traveled to Newport News today and spoke aboard the Gerald R. Ford. The nearly $13 billion warship is expected to be commissioned this year. Notre Dame picks Vice President Mike Pence to deliver this year's commencement address. The former Indiana governor says it's extraordinarily humbling to return to his home state to speak at the Catholic University's graduation ceremony. The Obamas have signed a deal with Penguin Random House for a pair of books. The publishing house won a bidding war for works by former President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama. It is unclear how much those books were paid, but it is reportedly more than $60 million. The books will likely be released next year. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. Nations and philanthropists pledge almost $200 million for groups that perform abortions. Organizers say the She Decides conference in Brussels wants to make up for the gap left by President Trump's ban on international abortion funding.
This is not an event or a movement against something or someone. It is a movement pro-women.
In all, 57 nations attended the one-day conference in Belgium, including Sweden, Canada, and Finland. But we spoke to Antoine Melado from the World Youth Alliance, who says many don't support this.
So this is a big problem of the politicians reaching to the population and to the citizens. They are just ignoring what they want to do.
One of Donald Trump's first acts as president was to cut U.S. funding for international groups that do perform abortion. Frustrated by what she described as Vatican stonewalling, a member of the panel advising Pope Francis about how to protect minors from clerical sexual abuse resigned yesterday. The departure is seen by some as another setback for the church's efforts to implement best practices for the protection of minors. Vatican correspondent Mary Shovlin joins us from Rome. Mary, what reasons are being cited for Marie Collins' resignation?
Lauren, in a statement released yesterday through Cardinal Sean O'Malley, who is the head of this Commission for the Protection of Minors, the statement said that she resigned because of a frustration she had with the lack of cooperation on behalf of some of the Vatican offices here that work with the Commission, obstacles in implementing some of these reforms, maybe the reforms not happening at the pace that she would have liked. And Marie Collins also issued her own personal statement yesterday, again saying she could not be a part of a commission that she no longer believed, saying she will help us educate people around the world, bishops and the like, in how to prevent clerical abuse from happening and how to deal with the effects of that in their local diocese, because she herself is a survivor of clerical sexual abuse.
What are other members from the commission saying, Mary?
Lauren, I talked to one of the commission members here in Rome, and he said he and the entire commission are committed to continuing their efforts against the clerical sexual abuse. But he said this is something that will take time and patience.
I've always said that this is something that needs mid and long-term planning and effort. This is a generational task, especially, as Marie said in one of her interviews I read this morning, she concurs with this, that this is something that will need time.
Lauren, the commission will meet together in about 3 weeks' time here in Rome. I asked Father Zollner what would be at the top of their agenda. He said they'll be studying the protection of children, school children, and this time the specific focus will be on South America. And he said, so the work continues on.
Mary Shovlin, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Lauren.
Gay activists mock Ash Wednesday with their Glitter Ash campaign. Rather than use ashes from burnt palm branches, they used glitter to make a cross on people's foreheads. Coming up, the yays have it.
And the nomination is confirmed.
Ben Carson joins President Trump's cabinet. And more of my one-on-one interview with the White House press secretary.
I think we need to remain true to ourselves and true to God.
Sean Spicer tells me how working in Washington challenges his faith. The doctor is in. The Senate confirms Dr. Ben Carson as housing secretary. The retired neurosurgeon grew up in inner-city Detroit and was praised by Republicans for his inspiring life story. Carson promises to address homelessness and other housing issues. Also today, the Senate confirmed former Texas Governor Rick Perry as Energy Secretary. Perry is 18 of Trump's 22 cabinet and cabinet-level nominations to win Senate approval. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer says his faith not only influences his life, but also those around him. He sat down with me yesterday for a wide-ranging conversation, including a discussion about religious persecution.
So often when we talk about religious liberty, we're talking about it from abroad, allowing those people who don't live in a country as free as ours to express their faith, what we find and what we've seen in the last couple of weeks is that we still have problems in this country when it comes to allowing some people openly and freely express their own faith.
And what I've seen on other outlets is that there's this presupposition that if you voted for Donald Trump, somehow, some way, you do not have respect for people who of other faiths. And I think that it was quite telling that he dispelled that notion yesterday.
Right. And I think the thing that's interesting is that what we're seeing in the attacks on the Jewish faith are reprehensible because they're actions, right? These threats that they're calling in, that's unacceptable. That's reprehensible. These vandalism acts that are occurring at cemeteries. But we also have to, there's another piece to this, and I think it also affects some of us in the Christian faith, that when we feel as though we can't openly discuss areas of faith, we can't talk about being pro-life without being shunned, that is also an area of religious liberty. When you feel as though that kind of dialogue or expression of faith is not welcome, that's equally intolerable. The idea that you can't openly talk about how you're going to express your faith and live your life in accordance with it without being considered
other than,
or something's wrong with you.
Less than.
And there are things that we are taught in the Bible that may not be politically correct these days. But God tells us they are the right things to do. And for someone to come in and say that our faith or our belief or our practice is less than acceptable because they don't fit some societal norms or some liberal philosophy
of what's right.
What's right and wrong is equally problematic.
Right, I'm with you. I asked this question of anybody of a Catholic faith. In this town, as Mark Leibovich's book calls it, it is really hard to practice your faith, especially when you have a demanding job, especially when it is in politics where you have to make a lot of compromises in order to succeed. So my question to you, Sean, is how do you balance that? How do you balance not only family and faith and having time to go to Mass, but how do you balance keeping true to your faith in what is a very, how should I say, unfaithful town?
I think you do what you mentioned. You go to Mass. You ask for God to give you grace and when you're wrong and guidance to do what's right. And I think that's what you can do whether you're in Washington, D.C. or Washington State. I think you have to wake up every day and follow in the teachings of God, and that's what guides you. And either you're tempted all the time. We say it in the prayer of St. Michael. May God rebuke him and to cast into hell Satan and all of the other spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. I mean, that's what we're up against every day, and I don't think it matters where you are. There might be more of those evil
more
spirits
of them right around the Capitol Hill.
but the fact of the matter is that the temptation and the evil spirits aren't limited to the 202 area code, and I think that we have to practice our faith and sometimes double down a little bit more depending on where we are. But I don't think we should kid ourselves that no matter where we are these days, that there are temptations, there are evil spirits, and I think we need to remain true to ourselves and true to God. And when we feel weak, we pray harder and ask the Lord to give us a greater set of strength and guidance and grace to do what's right. But I think sometimes it's actually those tougher times and more of those evil spirits that reinforce our faith because they challenge us and they remind us.
Without challenges, Mother Angelica always says, then what is the point of life? How does your faith grow?
Right, and I think that's the point, is that if it's easy, then that's not, because I think the other point, which is probably more so, is that how do we do what we're taught to do, which is to spread the word and to tell people that in a town like this to say, hey, that's inappropriate or that talk is wrong. And that's actually probably more challenging sometimes. It's not doing the right thing necessarily always for yourself. It's sharing that word with others and making sure that when we see something, we might intervene and say, hey, that's not appropriate, or to help steer the conversation towards something that's more Christ-like.
And more positive. I think that especially in your administration, you guys have a big target on your back. So
glad I'm facing forward.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I also asked Sean Spicer about rumors that President Trump is arranging a meeting with Pope Francis, and you'll hear his response tomorrow only on EWTN News Nightly. Up next, Pope Francis invites us to pray.
Anímense a hacerlo conmigo.
His call to help persecuted Christians. And Catholic Arthur Brooks sits down with me for a candid conversation. My interview with the president of the American Enterprise Institute. Praying for persecuted Christians. That's the Holy Father's intention for March.
Anímense a hacerlo conmigo para que experimenten el apoyo.
Pope Francis says some Christians have to abandon their homes and churches because of their faith, and he is asking for prayers for those affected around the world. This week, I sat down with Arthur Brooks, a leading conservative thinker, New York Times best-selling author, and a committed Catholic. We began our conversation talking about his unconventional career path. You've been a musician, a professor. How did it lead you to be the head of the most conservative think tank in the world?
It was a pretty winding path. People don't say, I need a new president for my conservative think tank. Get me a French horn player. That's not the way the conversation usually goes. I started out as a musician. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, in a family of artists and professors. My mother is a painter and my father was a math professor, and everybody was really into great music. And from the time I was 9, I wanted to be a professional French horn player. Weird. I mean, is that a thing? Turns out it's a thing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Are you?
The way it worked out is I was completely focused on that. I was pretty good at it. I loved music. I still do.
Yeah.
And when I was 19, I dropped out of college. And I went on the road playing classical music. I went on the road playing chamber music. I played a couple of years of jazz with a guitar player named Charlie Bird,
Oh, Charlie Bird, just that guitar player.
Yeah. And I wound up in the Barcelona Symphony. I made my living as a classical musician, but there was this point that was this turning point for me when I was asking myself the why of my work. You know, I've always believed in the sanctification of our work. I mean, that's what we believe as Catholics, that ordinary work is the essence of meaning and dignity and purpose in our lives. And I was asking, you know, what is the why? You know, why am I a French horn player? And I saw this quote by my favorite composer, Johann Sebastian Bach. He said, the aim and final end of all music is nothing less than the glorification of God and the refreshment of the soul. And I said, that's it. But it's a knife to the heart because I couldn't say that. I wasn't in my true vocation, so I started to look. I started to look for another way to do that, to really serve others and to serve God.
Let's come to Washington and today's environment. President Trump doesn't always align with traditional conservative thinking. What do you think the impact of the president has been on the conservative movement and on the poor in particular?
The effect of Trump is uncertain on the conservative movement so far. I mean, people are writing obituaries for traditional conservatism. That's really premature. And part of the reason is because there are people, intellectuals and activists and politicians, and everybody's got a different point of view. And Trump came to power with a more populist viewpoint and did something that was really salutary, really quite important, which was to say that there is a dignity gap in this country. There's maybe a third of the American population today that feels that they're being left behind by the free enterprise system. Now, you can take that as an attack on the free enterprise system, or you can take that as an opportunity to use the free enterprise system in a way that by the way, that you and I think is most appropriate to begin with, because we're Catholics.
And you want to serve the poor.
We want to serve the people, as the Pope would say, at la periferia de la sociedad, at the periphery of society.
We'll have more of Arthur's interview in the coming days. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. We leave you with an early bloom here in Washington. Believe it or not, the cherry blossoms have made their appearance, and they're expected to peak in 2 weeks. Good night, and God bless.